Hello, welcome to Waypoint Survival. Today, let's put some fletching on our primitive arrow. Stay tuned. So for this project, I have a couple of turkey feathers and a nice white goose feather. Now, one thing that's very important to know when you are selecting your feathers is you want to make sure that they're all from the same side, either the right wing or all from the left wing. And you can tell that by looking at the way that the feathers are made, and you can tell where the majority of the feathers are on one side as opposed to on this side where they're much smaller, and that's how you know which side of the bird they came from. So very important to check this out. Now on a feather, if you look close here, hopefully you can see that. Yeah, you can see that split down the middle of the feather, like right in here. That's a very important feature, and that really helps you to evenly divide the feather, this vein down the middle here. And so we're going to get our cutting board and I'll show you how to do that. So looking at our feather, and of course going for the split here in this vein and using a piece of wood as an anvil, we want to take the tip of our knife and just kind of start slicing it through here. And you don't want to necessarily go real deep at first. You get to the end, it gets thinner, so it's a little easier to push through. And we don't really want to use necessarily the very ends at this point. I'm looking for more for a center section here. Now once you get this cut a couple of times, and you'll find that the center of these are kind of pithy, and it's real soft. But once you get that going, you can actually lay your knife down, and then you can take this, and this will actually split apart fairly easily, just like this. And you just kind of pull it back, and then you determine about where you want to cut your feather, and we want to cut it somewhere right in here. So to make that cut, all we do is put our knife right here and push down. And now the sun's come out. Push down a little bit like this until we cut through. Alright, it jumped off here. There it is. Lay this to the side, and then we look at this section here, and what we want to do is we want to trim this area back just a ways for when we bind it on. So we're just going to take the knife, just very carefully, it's right in here, we're just going to cut that back. Just shave it real careful, and then you can pull this off, and see we've created somewhat of a flat spot right there. And we take our knife, just kind of clean that off a little bit. The next thing we want to do is determine about where do we want to cut at this end for the full total length of our fletching. And I'm going to do it about right in here, right in this section. So again, we just put our knife down, a little bit of a cut, and then this will pull off. Lay that aside, and now we have basically our feather, but we've got to do the same thing to the back that we did to the front here. We've got to trim off some of this feather. So again, we're going to do the very same thing. I'm going to come in here, just shave this back a little bit. Helps, of course, if you have a sharp knife. Okay, pull that off, and we see how that looks right there. Now we have a little bit of a tail on each end for binding. Again, we want to trim that down just a little bit. Not a huge amount, but we want enough to stick out that we can get a good binding on it. So you can see how much we have sticking out there. Oh, maybe half an inch, maybe a little bit more. Alright, the other thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that this angle on the front and the back, that everything is trimmed and shaped exactly the way we want it. This is a pretty good feather here, but it's a little bit wonky out here at the end, so we're going to trim that off. Okay, so now we have our feather. It's trimmed front and back, it's shaped, and pretty good design, pretty much like we want it. Now all we have to do is finish, and of course we want 3, and then let's attach it to our shaft of our arrow. Okay, and now we have 3, as you can see here, and the one is a different color on purpose. I'll show you that in a minute. But one thing that we want to do is we want to take our knife, and on the flat side where we split it here, we want to make sure and shave anything on here that might cause a bump, or it might not lay flat along the side of our arrow. So it's pretty pithy, so it's fairly easy to shave with a sharp knife, and you just want to go along and make sure you trim all of this off. Make sure that's nice and smooth so that it will bind well and there won't be anything to stick. So again, it's not hard, it just takes a little bit of time, and this is one of those projects that you'll find takes a little bit of patience. Okay, and I'd say that's pretty good right there. And if you will notice, they do all three curve the same direction, and the reason we want them all three to curve the same direction is so that when the arrow twists as it flies, it'll twist in the same direction. That twist helps keep it straight and on target. And so here we have our arrow that we put together, actually our shaft and arrowhead that we made in our last video. And now we have to do the other side for our nock. Now what you want to do is you want to look down the arrow and you want to make sure that your nock is in line. I like to keep it straight up and down with the arrowhead. So not flat that way, but this way. So when you put it on your bow, the arrowhead is straight out and not canted to the side one way or the other. And so what we're going to do, last time we used a saw. I was going to use the knife and then went to the saw. What we're going to do this time is I've got a piece of flint here, and it has a really nice jagged edge, like a sawtooth. And so what I'm going to do is, looking down this and looking at how that arrow shaft sits, realizing where that arrow is straight, and then coming right through here, what I can do is I can take a piece of charcoal and I can mark that. So here I have a piece of charcoal, and I'm looking down my arrowhead, and I can see the arrowhead sitting straight up and on that way. So using this marker here, I just draw a line, just like that. It's like a little black marker. And of course, I take this, I try to hold this close to my body, verify that I'm straight up and down. Yep, looks good. And then I take my piece of flint and I just start running it through my marking there. As you can see, it's already starting to make a bit of a groove. I'll finish that, get back with you. After you get your notch deep enough, or you're fairly happy with it, I'm going to put the rock here in my pocket and take my knife, and you just want to go in here and clean it out a little bit. Just get all that, and you can shape it and make it a little bigger. It needs to be big enough that it doesn't pinch and hold on to your bowstring. And this is one of those things that, depending on what kind of bowstring you make, whether it's sinew, other kind of natural cordage, or if you're using a shoelace or something like that. So there we go. Have it cleaned out, and it looks pretty good. Now we're ready to put our fletching on it, our feathers. Let's get to that. So the first feather that I'm going to put on is this white one. And I'm going to make sure that it goes on exactly beside our notch here, where it is. And the reason you do that is so that when you mount your other arrows, because you want to put them, because there's 3 of them, around the sides, you want to make sure that it slides past the bow section. So this arrow will be on the outside. And what's nice about that is, with one colored arrow on one side and 2 on the other, you always know, without having to look closely, where your nock is. So you always put it on like this with your fletching, your lightly colored or different colored arrow out to the side. So how we're going to attach this is we're going to take some of our survival glue. We've got our fire right here, and we're just going to take a little bit of this right here and get it on our stick, and then we're going to put a little bit of it on the edge of this feather here. Not a whole lot, we don't need a huge amount, just a little bit for our first attachment. Alright, and we're going to look at our arrow here, see exactly where we want it to go, put it beside our notch. So I'm going to put it right here, and then we're going to stick this right there. And we're just going to hold it for a minute until our glue attaches. See right there. Okay, we'll just let this end float free for the time being. Now we're going to check it, make sure it's exactly where we want it. Yep, that looks pretty good. Alright, now we're going to attach the other two using the same exact method. And here we have our 3 feathers, our fletching put on, glued on of course with our survival glue. The other thing that I did do is I took my knife and I slightly tapered the square ends of the arrows, the feathers rather, on this arrow. Alright, the next thing we need to do is get some artificial sinew chewed and start working on wrapping this and binding all of this down and putting it in the right place where it needs to go. Okay, we've got our sinew chewed up here, and just like we did before, when we put on the arrow, we have to kind of untangle it here. Get a long stringy bit, which is good. And then something else that I like to do with the sinew is I like to, once I get it straightened out a little bit, is I like to twist it a little bit, and to do a lot. We're not trying to make a bowstring here or anything, but just kind of give it a little bit of a twist like this, kind of help get everything firmed in, especially the ends. Alright, and then all we're going to do is we're going to start up here with our arrow, and we're going to lay it on here. I'm going to start toward the back. Get this twisted back up here a little bit better. Okay, it's good. We start here toward the back where the feather is, and kind of twist this around, pull it tight. Okay, I'm going to go around this way a couple of times, make sure I get that end in there real good, make sure it lays down, around. Okay, like this. I want to make sure this stays on really good, and you can pull pretty hard on this. Alright, that's pretty decent right there. And then we're going to get another piece, and we're going to go ahead and continue with this, and then we'll work our way down. So we've got our next piece of sinew ready, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to I've got some very small ends here, and I'm going to attach this using just a simple square knot. Right over left, left over right. Pull that through, kind of lock it in. Alright, very good. As you can see, it's just a very small knot. We can trim those ends off. And what we're going to do is we're going to continue to work our way around this all the way until we come to the front. We'll make a couple of passes on the shaft itself, all the way around here like this. Okay, and then we want to start working our way back. And as we do this, we want to straighten out our feathers. So how we do that is we go right between the veins. You can split them open like this, and you want to come right between the veins, just like that. Okay? And then we'll do it to this next section here. And again, during the time we're doing this, we're trying to straighten everything up. And you want to make sure you go back at an angle. I'll go ahead and do that and wrap this, and I'll get back with you when it's done and show you what that looks like. Okay, so what we did is just keeping everything at an angle, going back in between the feather veins here, and then coming back to the back here. Just wrapped it around and then tucked it in underneath the white one here. You can see a little bit sticking out. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take some of our survival glue, and we're going to put it lightly around our deer sinew here and seal that in. You can see what it looks like from the end. Not too bad. So let's Let's get that coated. Okay, so the process of putting this on here is the same as we've done with other things. We just get a little bit of our survival glue on our stick, and then we apply it in its liquid state to the deer sinew, front and back. And then we also want to, when it cools down just a little bit, we'll take our fingers and help make that a little smoother and make it look good, because we can't put this over the fire at any point now, because obviously it would catch our feathers on fire and burn them. So let's go ahead and get with that and see what happens with our survival glue here. We put it on. So for the next phase of our project with the arrow, I've got my bowl here that I hollowed out using fire, and it's pretty deep, and just made out of a solid piece of a log. What we're going to do is we're going to get in here and we're going to pick some of these blackberries, and I'll show you what that's for here in a minute. But got a little bit of a patch here, and it's almost out of season. There's just a few left, but enough for the project that we need. So I'm going to fill this up and get a few more in here, and I'll get back with you. So let's get some more blackberries. So we got a few blackberries in here, and all we're going to do is we're going to take our stick here, and basically we made it as a mortar and pestle, and we're going to just squash our blackberries up here and make a nice paste out of it. And of course, if you've ever used or been around blackberries much, you know how much they stain things. And of course, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for that beautiful color. Alright, so we have our arrow here, and you can see we've got this white goose feather here, and then these, of course, being our turkey feathers. What we're going to do with our paste here is we're just going to use our fingers. We're going to get in here and get some of this beautiful color, and we're going to stain our white feather and give it just a little bit of color. Alright, get that all in there, and let that dry out a little bit, and then we'll fluff it out, see what happens. As you can see, definitely will stain the fingers. Alright, so here's the arrow. As you can see, got all the color on there. It's a pretty light color of purple, and our feathers, things drying. But there's one more step that we want to do to this arrow before we can say that it's done. In this bottle is bear oil, rendered from bear fat. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this oil and I'm going to rub it lightly on this arrow. Not enough to soak it or make it wet, but enough to put a coating on it, which will help protect it from the weather. To do that, I'm just going to use a small piece of cloth, and we're just going to put a little bit of this oil on here. And again, remember, we are not trying to soak it. We just want a little bit of oil so that we can rub it on this arrow. So get a little bit on our rag, and I can feel it's fairly oily. It's pretty good. Might get just a little bit more. Alright, so I want to make sure that this is lightly damp with oil, but not dripping. One more dip. Alright, and that's good saturation. So let's go ahead and put the lid back on here. We'll set it down. Alright, now to put this on, all we're going to do is we're just going to take this and we're going to lightly coat this. And when I mean lightly, I don't mean saturate it again. Just going to come through here and main shaft of the arrow, make sure that it is well coated. And then we're going to come in here real carefully because we don't want this grease on our feathers. And we're just going to put a little bit in between, like this, around our nock. Doing this side here. And the last side right in there. Okay, and then make sure you get the inside of our nock. And of course this again helps to ensure that if we do get into a rainstorm or some kind of a dampness or a dew, that our arrow will stay relatively free from water. All right, and there we have it. I have a completed arrow, and it's ready to go. This is James Bender for Waypoint Survival. Please like, share, and subscribe. And make sure and press that bell button to stay notified of all of our upcoming videos. And we'll talk to you next time.